Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another one of our Long Beach Post live chats. Today, we are here with marine biologist extraordinaire, Chris Lowe, with the nationally renowned Cal State Long Beach Shark Lab. And Chris does some pretty cool things with tracking white sharks and all sharks. And if you guys have any questions for Chris, you can post them in Facebook and Twitter, and we'll try to get those answered. So I wanted to talk to Chris a little bit today about what we're seeing off the coast and if we've seen any impact from the coronavirus and just a little bit more about our marine environment and sharks. So Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah, so wanted to start out kind of on a little bit of a sad note, but talking about that news over the weekend of that surfer in Santa Cruz it's really sad.
It is really sad, and the thing that we have to remember is these are really rare events. But nonetheless, when it happens, the communities, the families, obviously, it's heartbreaking. However, with that said, we do have to remember that these are extremely rare events, and this is the beginning of shark season in Southern California. In Northern California and Central California, that season's really kind of the fall months. That's when the adults are coming back to take advantage of marine mammals that are aggregating to give birth and rear their young. But in Southern California, this is the beginning of baby season. So this is when big females are coming back from their oceanic migration and giving birth to their young. And what you'll get are sometimes these aggregations of sharks that set up along these beaches. So up off Santa Cruz, there's been an aggregation of juvenile white sharks that have been hanging out at this area where the water's warmer. It's the warmest part of Monterey Bay. And that aggregation has been there since 2015, particularly during the summer. So we think that some of those individuals got there as newborns during that strong El Nino. And once they go to these beaches, they kind of remember those beaches, it seems, and they'll return to them year after year. So unfortunately, I don't have any information about the shark that was involved in the bite on this poor gentleman.
Like it might be a white shark, though. Is that?
Most likely, it was a white shark. There are very few other species in California waters that can cause that kind of damage, but most likely it was a white shark.
Wow. Well, yeah. It's very, very rare, and but seeing what are we seeing here along the coast in Long Beach? How long have you been tracking sharks along here, and what are we seeing?
So we've been studying juvenile white sharks in Southern California since about 2006. So we've been working very closely with Monterey Bay Aquarium, and through their program, we've been tagging and tracking sharks to try to figure out where do they go, where do they spend their time, and what is the status of the population. So one of the things that we've learned since that time period is that usually starting in April or May is when we start seeing these newborn white sharks showing up at our beaches. And a newborn white shark is about 4.5 to 5 feet long at birth. And a female will give birth to anywhere from 2 to 15 babies at a time.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine how big that mom would have to be to give birth to 15 babies that weigh about 40 pounds apiece and are about 4.5 feet long.
That is amazing. I did not know that. Yeah.
So we don't know where they give birth. We just know that the babies start showing up at our beaches. And then they sometimes form these aggregations. So at a particular beach, you might find anywhere from 5 to 20 juvenile white sharks milling around just outside the surf zone.
And what have we seen here have we seen an increase in the last couple of years in Long Beach?
So overall, white shark population was probably negatively affected due to overfishing. So many of the baby white sharks were caught in commercial fisheries up until the mid-90s. And then in the mid-1990s, white sharks were protected in California, so it was illegal for fishermen to land them. Prior to that, white sharks that were caught and killed in nets were sold in fish markets. And a lot of people probably don't know this, but they probably ate fish tacos that were made from white shark meat, and they thought it was mako or thresher. You can't really tell the difference. But nonetheless, those things had impacts on the white shark population. The other thing that probably greatly affected the white shark population for over 100 years, so it was illegal, was the systematic loss of marine mammals. So by the early 1900s, most of the great whales, seals, and sea lions had been completely hunted out. I mean, many of them were on the verge of extinction. And then they were protected nationally in 1973 under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And since then, we've watched most of their populations go up, and they've recovered amazingly. So what we think is that protection of marine mammals and then protection of white sharks in the mid-1990s has allowed the population to recover. And that's why over the last 15 years or so, I would say we're seeing a sign of population increase.
And then you said you've tagged about 8 off the coast just so far this season, or when?
In the last 3 weeks, we've tagged. Yeah, we've tagged 8 juvenile white sharks.
Where exactly? So I know where not to paddleboard.
Up off Santa Barbara.
Oh, up off Santa Barbara. Okay.
Yeah. So we work from the Mexican border all the way up to Morro Bay.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of the range of habitat that we're working in. And when those aggregations form, we try to get out and put tags in those sharks. And then using a wide variety of technology, we're able to kind of spy on them and kind of detect where they're moving and look at how they're moving through the water column and the water temperatures that they like, how much time they spend at a beach. So we have a large array of acoustic receivers, and then we dart tag, or if we catch the shark, we can surgically implant a transmitter into that shark's body that will last 10 years. So we can track them from basically being a baby to almost adulthood.
Wow. Yes, that brings it, just reminds me of some of the cool technology that you're using. You're using some stuff right off the coast here too, that's some cool new technology. What are some of the things that you're doing right now that you guys are excited about?
So in addition to the tagging, if we can catch and tag a shark, we're using satellite transmitters. These are transmitters that we dart into their back, and they have a temperature sensor, a light sensor, and a depth sensor. And it kind of hangs off the shark's back and earring. And as the shark moves up and down through the water column, it's measuring the temperature of the water that it's moved through and its depth. But because a satellite transmitter is a radio transmitter and radio waves don't penetrate through seawater, this tag is designed to pop off the shark, float to the surface, and while it's bobbing at the surface, it's uploading all that data to a satellite, which then turns around and emails it back to me in my office. So we can recreate the movements of those sharks, especially big migrations. The other technology we use are called acoustic transmitters, and those are transmitters that produce a sound wave, and sounds travel really well through seawater, but you have to have a receiver. So our receivers are these underwater receivers that we have all along the beaches, about 100 yards off the shoreline. And they're listening for sharks as they move up and down the coast. So when a shark gets within 300 yards of one of those receivers, the receiver will log the time, the date, and the ID number. So it's kind of like Easy Pass on the toll roads, kind of tells you how many times yeah, exactly. So we can use that to track their movements and see how much time they spend at a beach. But some of the other tools that we're using are things like drones. So we're doing drone surveys all along the Southern California coastline, where we're trying to not just see how many sharks we see along beaches, but we actually don't know how many people are in the water and what water user groups, surfers, stand-up paddleboarders, swimmers, boogie boarders, who are interacting with those sharks the most. And because many of those activities are correlated with environmental conditions, like for example, when the surf's up, you mainly see surfers out, right? And fewer swimmers and fewer waders. But when the surf's flat, you get more waders, more swimmers. So if we can look at where those people are in proximity to the sharks from the wave break into the shoreline, we can begin to develop what we call encounter assessments. So what water user groups are most likely to encounter sharks? And if we can correlate that with environmental conditions, like was it a sunny day? Was it calm? Was there big surf? Then we might be able to make predictions on when certain users might encounter sharks at different locations along our coastline.
So that you could have like kind of a shark warning period for people to be extra cautious.
Exactly.
Interesting. And what is you've been doing some of this tracking and data for a while. Is there anything that you're learning now that's really coming out as surprising to you or interesting to you? What are some of the biggest things you're seeing right now, maybe?
So one of the things that we found is that these young white sharks, even though white sharks are what we call endotherms, so they're kind of like humans, they can keep their body core warmer than the environment. Most sharks are called ectotherms, and their body temperatures become the same temperature as the water they move through. But white sharks, as long as they're swimming, they can produce heat. And if you touched one, it would feel cool to the touch. But if you stuck a thermometer into its body, you would see its temperature go up. So by keeping its muscles warmer, it can swim faster, it can dive deeper, its brain works better, it can digest food faster. So all of these features make the white shark capable of actually chasing down and taking down a healthy marine mammal. The babies have all the same equipment as the adults, but because their bodies are so small, they don't they can't hold the heat very well. So one of the things that we found is that their migrations are cued by water temperature. So when our water temperatures dip below 60 degrees in the winter, that is a cue for them to migrate south to Baja. And they'll overwinter in coastal waters off Baja. And then in the next spring, some of those sharks migrate back to Southern California. In addition, we found that some sharks don't like the water too warm. So if the water gets over 84 degrees, that's too warm for them. And they either dive deeper or they'll move further north away from the warm water. So we've been able to determine, based on our tracking technology, that juvenile white sharks are kind of like the three bears. They don't like it too warm and they don't like it too cold. They have this sweet spot that they really are the temperatures that they're looking for.
Oh, interesting. And are there any sweet spots like that kind of around Long Beach that you see? So,
from a broad standpoint, yes. So for example, we know that in the spring, in the summer, that these sharks will come to our beaches and that this is good habitat for them pretty much all summer and fall. And then in the winter, when that big temperature drop first occurs, that's usually the cue to migrate. What was really interesting was in that 2015 El Nino, our water temperatures never got below 65 degrees during the entire winter. And none of the sharks that we tagged that summer left. They all stayed throughout the entire year.
wow.
So it kind of
Mhm.
told us that, temperature is a key factor.
So, and with the ocean getting warmer, could we essentially see just more sharks just staying year round? Like, hey, this is nice. I think why leave?
Exactly. And I think that's something we're already starting to see. In fact, that aggregation that occurs up off Santa Cruz very well could be an indication of that, right? Because that warm spot off Santa Cruz has perpetually been staying warmer and warmer. And it's providing a new habitat for juvenile white sharks. So as the climate continues to warm, we should expect white sharks showing up in places where we haven't necessarily seen them before.
And where do the fully grown adults go? Are they out in more deeper waters?
So my colleagues have been tagging them at places like the Farallon Islands and
Yeah.
Anita Nuevo, which are aggregation sites for the adults. That's where they go to feed, or places like Guadalupe Island off Baja. And when they've tagged them, they found that in the winter, when the elephant seals leave, those sharks migrate out to the middle of the Pacific, halfway between Hawaii and Baja. And they'll spend 8 months to a year and a half out there
Hanging
before
out.
returning.
Wow.
And we have really no indication of what they're doing out there. There's some indication that they're eating. Obviously, they're out there for a year and a half. Some of the thoughts are they're eating fish or squid. There doesn't appear to be a lot of marine mammals out there, but we don't really know. And then, of course, we don't know where they mate. So it would be a hard place to find a mate because that part of the ocean is absolutely enormous. But why? Why do they spend 8 months to a year and a half out there?
Yeah.
Just don't
And
know.
how long can they live?
So that's another kind of interesting challenge that biologists have been trying to figure out. And the way we age sharks are like way we age trees. So they put down rings in their vertebrae. So if the shark is dead, you can look at its vertebrae and you can count the number of rings. So biologists have been able to take some of the biggest vertebrae in collections and estimate that they may live as long as 70 years.
Wow. And then how big can they get? You said we were discussing earlier, the females are larger than the males significantly.
Yeah,
So that large of babies you'd have to be.
pretty big, right?
Yeah.
So the maximum length that we think they can attain is somewhere around between 20 and 23 feet. The biggest shark on record that there are good measurements for are about 20 feet long. And it's not really the length at that point, it's their mass. They get enormous. Yes, huge girth. So as they get bigger and longer, they also get girthier, and females in particular. So females are always, most mature females are always larger than the males.
There's the pictures of, I think they call her Great Blue, but there's that one female down in the islands off Mexico where she's like so docile. There's swimmers. Is that real? I've seen pictures of that. I've wondered if it's been doctored, but it looks,
No,
you know,
no,
I'm
those are real. You know, people do swim with them. It's never advised. They are a wild animal and they are still unpredictable. With that said, you know, just because you see a shark in the water doesn't mean it's going to bite you. So that's kind of the biggest misconception. However, chasing them around and trying to ride them and touch them, probably not a good idea for any wild animal, let alone a 20-foot white shark.
Yeah. And we did get a question from one reader asking if you think maybe the shark that killed the surfer in Santa Cruz was a juvenile shark, likely.
We don't know. There's an investigation going on right now. You know, sometimes it's very hard to tell how big the shark was from bite marks. Sometimes if they're in the surfboard, sometimes you can get a better idea. We don't have that information at this point. Because of the time of year, is most likely it was a large juvenile. Because of that stretch of the coast, really, it's the fall months are when the adults are back. So that would be the best guess, but there's no good information on that right now.
Okay. These larger juveniles can do a good amount of damage too, I imagine.
Well, you know, they're 9 or 10 feet long.
Yeah.
You know, they weigh a couple 100 pounds. They're just starting to try to figure out how to feed on marine mammals. And they're probably very bad at it. It may take a white shark years to learn how to successfully take down a healthy marine mammal. So in the meantime, they're feeding on stingrays and fish and things like that. So we just don't know, you know, whether that was a big juvenile that was thinking it was a marine mammal and it made a mistake. These are things we just don't know. What I can tell you is there are plenty of those big juveniles around our beaches. People never see them, and they're not bothering people. So if you look at the rate at which humans make mistakes and you compare that to the rate at which white sharks are making mistakes, we make a lot more mistakes than they do, apparently.
And another question we had, people were wondering, you know, with less people in the water, well, you kind of debunked this earlier, but with less people in the water, with, you know, people social distancing and staying away from the beaches, are we seeing more sharks out there right now? You're saying that's not necessarily the case.
Well, you know, it's interesting because for other wildlife, that's truly been the case, right? So people are seeing coyotes walking through their neighborhood in the middle of the day.
There's like buffaloes on the coast over in Catalina just laying on the beach.
Sure. However, you know, we've seen more people in the water surfing during the stay at home than we did prior. So part of that's
staying out of the water. Yeah.
And I can't blame them, right? The weather's been great and surf's been good. So as long as people are being careful and social distancing, you know, obviously that is the most important thing, but it probably hasn't changed the behavior of the sharks. And the reason why I bring that up is because over the last 10 years studying these aggregations, we've seen aggregations of these juvenile white sharks at places like Manhattan Beach, where there are 1,000 people in the water.
Yeah, that's like prime surfing spot.
Oh my gosh. And the sharks are just swimming by surfers and swimmers, and they just don't care. So my guess is that's happening all the time. It's just most people don't see them or know that they're there, and they're not bothering anybody. So what we always tell people is, look, you know, those aggregations may be there, and if you see them, and one thing we don't want to do is chase them around, you know, try to get pictures of them, you know, try to lure them with bait. As long as we don't do those things and we mind our own business, I think people are pretty safe.
What's one thing that you would love to know about these sharks that you're still just baffles you?
My God, I have a list. So probably the first one would be, where do they give birth, right?
Oh yeah, I remember you saying that because you thought maybe they give birth out by Catalina, but we don't really know, or
we don't know. So when you think about all the planes and helicopters and drones flying along our coastline all the time, if a big 20-foot female was coming in and giving birth to 15 babies along, let's say, Huntington Beach, somebody would see it, right? So our thoughts are maybe that females are giving birth in the channel in deeper water. And because those babies are incubating in a nice warm mommy, when they're popped out into the water, that water is a little cold. And what we think that does is it drives them to the surface and then into the shoreline with a water swarmer.
Oh.
So that's a big mystery. We'd love to know where they give birth. We don't know where they mate. So we don't know if that occurs out in the middle of the Pacific, or after they're done feeding on elephant seals, do they stick around those islands and mate? We just don't know the answers to those questions.
Fascinating. Yeah. So, and switching gears a little bit, just wanted to talk about what we're seeing off the coast, the strange red, orange, like the red tide. I can't remember the last time I've seen that. And I took the Duffy boat out the other night and put my hands in the water, and it was like slow, swirling blue. It was so cool. But
yeah,
why is that here again? And what is it? And what's it
yeah. So those are plankton.
Back.
Sure. So those are phytoplankton, tiny, tiny little plants, and they reproduce very quickly under the right conditions. So everybody might recall a couple weeks ago, we had a full week of rain, something we normally don't get. And we had a record amount of rain.
Yeah.
So you get all that rain hitting the ground, washing out all the nutrients from our lawns and from everything else out into the coastal waters. And then that rainstorm was followed by a period of nice, calm, hot weather. So anybody who's a gardener knows that if you provide plants with the right conditions, they can grow really fast. And that's exactly what happened. Those phytoplankton bloomed, and they reproduce so fast that the water turns that kind of brownish, ruddy red. And they produce a bioluminescence, which helps them avoid getting eaten. It scares their predators. But they're in such mass that at night, they can suck all the oxygen out of the water. So in some places, they can cause big fish die-offs. Other animals can die. And then many of these phytoplankton also produce toxins. So people have to be a little careful. It's not recommended that you swim in it.
Yeah, I was going to ask because I've seen people swimming in it, and my one friend said, "Oh, you can go out and swim and swirl your hands around." I was like, "Is that safe?"
It's pretty cool to do, but you have to be careful, right? Because it depends on the type of phytoplankton. Some of them can produce worse toxins than others. And this particular one does produce a neurotoxin, but it's not nearly as bad as some of the other phytoplankton that also bioluminesce. So this is why it's never recommended to really go swim in red tide waters. It's cool, but you got to be careful. And people with respiratory issues have to be careful too, because when the waves break, those toxins get into the air and you inhale it. So this is where people should be a little careful. It's beautiful to watch, but it's also not good for our local wildlife, because many of those animals at night can suffocate because those little plankton suck out all the oxygen out of the water.
Mm-hmm. And so we hadn't seen this in a couple of years. Was this just like a perfect storm with the storm coming and the warm?
Normally, it's very spotty. It'll occur in certain locations, but because of the weather pattern that we had and those Pineapple Express that lined up, it covered pretty much the whole Southern California coastline. So we've created this kind of mega bloom. Instead of the poppies going off, is phytoplankton.
And how long can we expect it to be here? Looks like I keep thinking it's going away a little bit, and then today it was like back with a vengeance.
Yeah, so it's already been a month. That's actually a long time for a bloom. I think many of the oceanographers think that it should start breaking down. Right now, we're getting a swell coming in and the wind will pick up a little bit. That'll turn the water over. And we haven't had rain for a while. So pretty soon they start to use up all the nutrients, and then many of them die off.
Okay. And then with that, now we're seeing the moon jelly. Do the moon jellies feed off of this plankton too? Is that?
Yeah, so that bloom.
That was in a couple of years too. It was like so excited to see the moon jellies back.
Yeah, and it's a good time to be a moon jelly, right? So all that plankton in the water is all food. So it's like the buffet has been laid out for them. So now they're popping out and they're all growing, and they're going to be feeding heavily on all those plankton. And that's typically what you see. So the phytoplankton are the basis of the food chain. And when they blossom, that brings out all these other animals. So a lot of fish are reproducing right now, and their babies will be feeding on those. So, it's kind of a typical spring thing. But as you mentioned, this is kind of the mega version of our normal spring. Wow. We get another bloom in the fall, but it's never as big as it is in the spring.
So right now it's basically teeming with life here.
Pretty much.
More than normal. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it. That was really fascinating. And you guys do some amazing work at the Shark Lab. And can't wait to find out more about what research and what you're going to see after this shark season.
Well, thank you. And people can go to our website, our Facebook page, Twitter's, and see what we're doing and get caught up on what we're doing on a pretty much a day-by-day basis.
Yeah, you have the cool, like you have a video shark tracker, don't you? You can, how does that work? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a new one coming out where you'll be able to track white shark movements along the coast, not in real time. So it's all archived data, but you'll be able to see where our sharks have gone. And then we have lots of information for the public about beach safety, stingrays, all the things they may encounter if they go to the beach.
Yeah, which we'll need to know. Right. Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.